Hello everyone and welcome to the Celtic Down Under Tuesday Crew off-season podcast special. I'm your host for tonight, Stephen McCutcheon, and I'm very delighted to be joined tonight by Willie and Steve. So I'll go to you first, Willie. How are you? And how are you coping with the off-season?
I'm doing okay. I'm getting a bit bored without football, to be honest with you. I was up at a football Ferns game. Took my daughters up to their first football match, so we watched the New Zealand women's team play in Napier. 2-0 win over Vietnam, and we got a chance to see Celtic's live chance play, so it's quite an enjoyable night for all.
All right, sounds like fun. Steve, how are you passing the long off-season days?
Yeah, pretty similar, really. Found myself watching the FFA Cup last night, and I'm missing out on it tonight as we record this. But yeah, it's been a long off season already, and we've got a few more weeks to go.
Yeah. I mean, it's coming over the horizon, but it'll be here before we know it. Anyway, tonight the subject matter of tonight's show is talking a little bit about where Celtic are benchmarked against clubs that we consider to be our European peers. Looking at who these clubs are, how we compare to them, and what we need to do better. In essence, and we're going to do a bit of a deep dive into it, and hopefully we can, as well as spreading a little bit of information round, we can also maybe reach some conclusions as to what we think we can do better. We're not live tonight. We're recording this podcast, so if you want to join the conversation and let us know what you think, please reach out to us on all our social channels, Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, with all the handles being at the top of the screen here and in the episode notes. So please let us know what you think, and all feedback is welcomed. So we'll dive right in here to the first slide we have to show. And that's really pertaining to why does all this matter? And I'll pass over to you, Steve, as to why this stuff matters.
Yeah, so look, just by way of context, I mean, we've spoken on and off through the course of the season about being a bit frustrated at the fact that, the old board, the old attitude used to be, as long as we were a tiny bit better than Rangers, then that was enough. And I think the three of us kind of violently agreed that actually that's not enough. We need to be looking upwards rather than looking downwards, So we were kicking it around off air, and we were talking about it, and we were saying, look, what we need to be doing is looking at European peers and thinking, how do we compare to them? What are they doing smarter than us, or what are we doing better than them, or how can we stretch, and become more like some of our European peers? And there's been a bit of discussion in the Celtic universe around about that over the last few weeks, as to who are our European peers, and we'll look at that in a second. But I think we all three of us kind of agreed that actually, that's what we should be aiming for. And I know what happens then is people say, oh, but we need to prioritize the domestic competitions. We need to be successful domestically before we focus on Europe. And, there's this school of thought or argument that says it's either or, but I think the three of us agree, actually, why can't we have both? If we're building a side and a club that's going to be successful in Europe, then, without being, too comfortable about it, domestic success should follow. The two things aren't opposing forces. If we're successful in Europe, then it should follow that we should be able to be successful domestically as well. So that's where it kind of came from. And we thought, well, actually, rather than just pulling clubs out the air and thinking about, European peers and whatnot, we thought we would take a bit more of a data-based approach to it. So we're going to look at a number of different metrics, including some that are probably a little bit stretchy, but we'll see, to compare ourselves to these European peers and think about how, what they're doing that's smart, or what we are doing, that's smart, and take it from there. So that's the kind of context. That's where this came from originally.
So yeah, I think obviously we're all in agreement about European success being important, and I think it's so critical to the financial performance of the club as well. I mean, it literally is the difference between a good financial season and a bad financial season is a good run in Europe, and that can mean the difference between having to sell a player or having capacity to buy a player. It is really that simple. So what's your take on that, Willie? Do you agree that European success is something really critical for the club?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the Champions League is where Celtic need to be every season. We look at, as we go through this and go through our peer groups, we need to see that all these teams base themselves on their financial success being in the Champions League. Most of them do. So we can't be any different from that. I know in past we've gone and based our finances and our spending on being a Europa League team. But I think now we need to look at being consistently in the Champions League every season from here on forth, because that is the only way forward for us.
Yeah, so that brings us on to our next point, and that is what does success in Europe look like for Celtic? Because we hear a lot of talk, and it's become a bit of a buzzword on the Celtic social, especially over the last few weeks since Brendan arrived back. And what is this next level in Europe that everybody talks about? You know, every time we're linked with a player, we're asking, is he the player to get us to the next level in Europe? So what do we think, guys, that what does success look like to Celtic? Well, obviously, I think we can all agree we're not going to win the Champions League. But what is success, Steve?
What do you mean we're not going to win the Champions League? Look, I think it's success in stages, right? So, to my mind, we need to set milestones, right? And maybe the first milestone is in Europe in some form after Christmas. And I know the European format's changing, and we might do a feature on that, outside this episode. We might look at that, in terms of what I think it's 2024-25 season looks like for Europe, and we lose that drop down from Champions League to Europa League and, all the rest of it. But I think for me, actually, being in some form of competition post-Christmas, is some form of success, because that implies we're finishing second or third or top of the group, and that to me needs to be the first milestone or the first objective. And then I think you take it from there. The reality is, and we'll look at why in a moment, the cards are really stacked against us, going into European competition. We're a pot four side, and we're a pot four side for a reason. We'll look at that. But that makes our job so much harder, So if we can build year on year, get to the point where we're qualifying as a pot three side, it makes the draw, more practical. And then I think you set the second objective from there. So first objective, European competition post Christmas, and then we set the second objective. After that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, I think being a pot four side, any teams we beat in the Champions League is European success as such. Because if we can finish third in a group, then clearly we're playing above our seeding platform. So that is success. And if we can finish second, all the better. Are you in agreement with that, Willie?
Yeah, I mean, European football after Christmas is the key factor this season, and then next season we look at how this Champions League format's going to play out. Hopefully it'll be sort of to get into the playoff positions and that. But first and foremost is this season coming up, and third in the group should be our target. And it's not beyond us. I mean, 7 points would probably see you comfortably in third position, so that should be your target. 2 home wins and maybe an away draw somewhere along the line if we're lucky, and that should get us through. So it's not out with our grasp, that sort of results. If we can get that home form going again in the Champions League, then we can certainly get there. So here's hoping.
Yeah, okay. So now that we've got an idea of what success looks like, we'll move on and have a look at who are we actually up against in the way of making ourselves better. And I'll bring up the first slide we're going to show here. And I might ask you, Steve, to talk us through this for the benefit of those on audio. just to tell us what this slide's showing, what we're looking at.
So for those watching in black and white, the red ball is just behind the brown ball or whatever it was. So look, what we've tried to do here is identify 19 European peers, right? So we started this exercise. We looked at, obviously, the European coefficient and, who were the top sides and all the rest of it. And I think we all quite quickly came to the collective view that it doesn't really make that much sense to really benchmark ourselves against a Man City or EPL sides or even, La Liga sides. The reality is those big 5 leagues, their broadcasting deals or their commercial deals really mean it's a bit senseless for us to be comparing ourselves to them. So we decided to rule out, rightly or wrongly, we decided to rule out the big 5 leagues for the moment. So we then looked at the next tier down. So that's the leagues 6, 7, and 8. And you've got the kind of Dutch and the Portuguese sides in there. And you'll see a lot of those. So from the Netherlands, we've got Ajax, Feyenoord, PSV, and AZ. And from Portugal, Benfica, Porto, Sporting Lisbon, and Braga. And then we basically looked at the coefficient league and pulled in a number of other clubs that, just intuitively we would think would be a sensible kind of comparison point for ourselves. So, the Copenhagens of the world or Galatasaray, etc. So, look, I think it'd be fair to say, are they the right 19 clubs to compare ourselves to? I don't know. You could really probably make an argument for any, subset of clubs around Europe. But they're a reasonable set for us to look towards. And I think they also, and we'll see this as we go through, they also probably operate in slightly different ways, across some of those clubs. So we'll probably see, how other clubs are successful, and how they operate. And we did include, after a bit of debate, we did include Rangers, having started by saying, I get a bit cheesed off when all we do is benchmark ourselves against Rangers. I don't think we can ignore them either. So I think it's worthwhile including them, for comparison reasons. So what you can see here are those 19 clubs. You can see which league they come from or which country they come from rather, and then which, kind of league, whether it's league 6 to 8 or 9 to 15 or even 16 to 27, which kind of area they come from. You can see where they've won the Champions League or the Europa League or the Conference League, I think that is, yeah. UEFA Cup or the Cup Winners' Cup. And obviously, you can see Celtic sitting proudly at the top of that table. I'm afraid to say that might be the only time we see us sitting proudly at the top of that table. But anyway, put that to one side for a moment. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to compare ourselves against these clubs, looking at measures like, our brand or our revenue or our player trading, etc.
Yeah, and Willie, are you in agreement? We're looking at the correct clubs here. Is there any you think we've missed?
Nah, looking at the list, I mean, I had a wee look at their sort of ins and outs, money-wise and transfers and dealings and that. There's clubs there that we dwarf. There's clubs in there that dwarf us. So it's all sort of much a really good group that there's people we should aspire to try and get alongside, and then there's people who should be looking to pull away from in there. So I'm quite happy with the setup that's there, yeah.
Okay, so we'll move on to our next slide, which is showing the European coefficient points total of the clubs, of all the clubs up to what number is that there? What have we got? The top 70
yeah,
or something, right? And that doesn't make very pleasant reading for us, to be honest with you. We're sitting there at 56th. And our old pals from across the city are up there in 30th, and pretty much everybody else on the list that we were benchmarking ourselves again is above us. Willie, what's your take on that? Is that a surprise to you, or is that where you thought we would be?
It is due to poor performances after Christmas and any sort of knockout stages, it doesn't come as any sort of surprise to me that we're quite low down there. I'm surprised Rangers are as high up as they are, considering their performance last season in the Champions League. It wasn't it wasn't a showstopper by any imagination, but they still seem to have retained their place quite high up the list. So, but I think we are where we are, and we know why we're there, so we can't really complain about it.
Yeah, for sure. I think Rangers, it's obviously their coefficient points is tallied over a number of years, so their run to the Europa League final will certainly be included in that. And they did have a lot of wins in that run. So, Steve, any comments on this?
No, it's let's be honest, it's not that comfortable viewing. Maybe a couple of quick comments, actually. So you can see the domination of the big five leagues there, right? So, Man City, Bayern Munich, Chelsea, and all the rest of it. You can see, having ruled out all those big five, we've included pretty much every other club, down towards that kind of middle, bulk where the clubs are. It is scored over 5 years, so yeah, Rangers had, I think it was the worst ever Champions League performance by any club in the history of the tournament last season, which made me laugh until I saw this league and realised that they're sitting, 26 positions above us. But that's what this is about. This is about, understanding what we can do, or, why we are where we are, etc. And, let's be very clear, the number of clubs that Scotland gets to put into Europe is based on the national ranking. But then when you get into Europe, where you're seated, or, which pot you go into, is driven by this individual club ranking. So the fact that we're 56th in this league means that we are very firmly a top 4 team. I think we would need a minor miracle for that to be anything else for this year. And the whole objective really is to understand what we can do to become, a more solid top 3 team, or, whatever. And that's really what this conversation is about.
Yeah, I think this just nails for me, why it's not only important for Celtic to improve their coefficient, it's absolutely vital. It's really quite embarrassing when you see some of the teams that are sitting comfortably above us. Teams like AA Ghent from Belgium, FC Copenhagen from Denmark. Teams with a fraction of our resources, as we'll go on to discuss later, comfortably 10, 15 places above us in the UEFA coefficient, and that's just simply not good enough. So that kind of shows you where we've failed over the last number of years, decades actually. So, I mean, it's over a decade since we won a knockout tie in European competition, and 5 bonus points. If any of you could tell me who we beat in that knockout tie.
What, between Willie and I? Or
yeah.
Barcelona.
Correct.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too.
and I was actually at that game in the Nou Camp, so I'm not going to say it was a football classic. It was a backs to the wall performance, but it was a lot of years ago.
David Marshall might beg to differ with you on that, like.
Yeah. I'm sure he does. It was his sort of high point of his career. It all went downhill after that.
Yeah.
All right, so that's where we are. So let's look at where we have been in the past, just to show what's happened to the club. And this is like a historical coefficient chart, which goes back to the mid-60s.
We just picked that at a random date. Just 1966 was the starting point for that view, just randomly, Steve. So
Yeah. Okay. And what's the 2 lines on the graph, Steve? Just for
all right. So the green line is us, and we'll talk about that in a second. The orange line is Glasgow Rangers, and you'll see that disappears off the chart around about 2016, and then re-emerges as Sevco. So just one for the Celtic Daz there. And this is just showing, where we were as a club, So if you look at that in the 60s, obviously we won the bloody thing in 1967. But what a lot of people might not remember, or younger listeners might not know, was that we were quarter finalists 3 times in the 10 years after that. We were finalists in 1970, losing out to Feyenoord, and we were semi-finalists another twice as well, including once where we lost out on penalties. So if you look at that period from 66, 67 through to even late 70s, 79, 80, the reality is we were one of the top European sides. We were the top European side for 1 year, but measuring that over the 5 years used to produce the coefficient, we were one of the top sides. You can see our ranking there, going between 2 and 3 and 2 and 3, 2, 4, etc. So all the way up until probably the Billy McNeill era, where he first managed the club, we were one of the top European sides.
Yeah, and this and it also shows how far we've dropped, Willie, from that point, which was a high point for the club, and it's really been a steady decline since then. Anything jumps out at you from that chart?
From my lifetime, it's sort of Billy McNeill's second spell, and it's just been a steady decline from there on in. You go up to the John Barnes era when it just drops by 115. And then Martin O'Neill sort of brings a sort of semblance of respectability back to it. And then Gordon Strachan carries it on. But then Tony Mowbray, it just seems to sort of peel off again towards the end. We just sort of seem to be plateauing around that 50, highs of 47 and that. So we seem to be settling into that 55, 47, 45, between 45 and 55. We seem to be settling into that sort of area and plateauing into that.
Yeah, I think that 115th there and round about the turn of the century there, that must have been a statistical outlier of some kind. I can't imagine we were ever that bad.
So look, UEFA change how they measure this, periodically, and I think that was just one of their changes. It is where it is. I think everyone's ranking, tanked or moved around a lot. I can't explain it fully, but certainly, we can't blame all of that on John Barnes. But yeah,
blame a lot of it on John Barnes. Yeah. I think it's clear what we can see from this. Yeah, so we were a dominant force in Europe in the 60s and through the 70s, and it's been a steady decline, sort of punctuated with a blip during the Martin O'Neill years, which will probably be important, I think, when we go to look at player trading and what we spend on players and salaries and stuff. I think we might see a correlation there. I'll also mention the last of those quarterfinals there in 79-80 was another game I was at. We played Real Madrid and lost to them 3-2 on aggregate, and it's just incredible to think that was a quarterfinal of a European Cup. It seems amazing now, and it doesn't seem that long ago, although it was a long time ago. Also, I think we've missed a trick there when Rangers disappear and Sevco reappear from like the grave there. We could have had a little zombie emoji there, I think. I think for next time we'll put a little zombie in there, and that'll be So that's that one. So the next thing we'll talk about is let me just pull the next slide up, and we'll have a look at exactly how big Celtic are. So we all think the Celtic are this massive, humongous football juggernaut, and it was interesting to note that Davy Moyes in a press conference down here in Australia the other day there alluded to the fact, and the question was from an Australian journal, how do you think Ange's going to cope with the pressure of being manager of Tottenham Hotspur in the Premier League? And Davy Moyes' retort was, when you've been manager of Glasgow Celtic, who are, I think he said, third or fourth best supported team in the world, then you can do anything, and you know all about pressure anyway. Now, I think we'll probably go on and show that Davey was a little bit off with his figures there, but good on him for fighting the cause and and for flying the flag for Celtic, and that was nice to hear. So I'll pull this one up, and this is showing us ground capacities by club. So Willie, do you want to talk us through this one?
Yeah, as the capacities go, you can see there, like Benfica have a 65,000 capacity stadium, Celtic 61, Ajax is slightly lower than 56. We have one of the biggest stadiums in Europe of our peer group, and we have one of the highest average attendances too to go with it, so we are sort of ahead of this one. I think we've touched on that before. It's one of the reasons we get like a between 5 and 10 million head start on Rangers every season financially. I mean, because of this capacity advantage of 10k. So, yeah.
And Steve, anything jumps out there?
No, not really. I mean, it's just kind of interesting, and we'll look at how some of those teams at the lower end of that, the Shakhtars or whatever, who just a 30k capacity kind of ground, and yet they're arguably punching above their weight, when it comes to some of the financial metrics, etc. But yet Willie's bang on. We're one of the top sides in terms of ground capacity across those European peers.
I think as it goes for average attendance, we're neck and neck with Benfica. Sort of, it's nip and tuck.
And you hear that. I mean, let's be honest. I know it's a bit grating at times. Hearing these top players coming to Parkhead, and it's a bucket list thing. To play on a European night. And all the rest of it. They treat it like it's some kind of showground or whatever. And it annoys me a little bit. I want it to be a bit more intimidating than that. But you do hear it, and Celtic on European nights, when the lights are going and the anthem's going. I mean, it's one of the top places to play, and that's because we've got that group of fans behind us. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you, Steve. There, I'm sick of hearing players that want to come and play at Celtic Park and say how great it is and how brilliant it is. And I don't think we need any more of that. I think we need to turn it into a place where players are afraid to come because they know the crowd are going to get right on them, and they know that they've got a little chance of winning. To be honest, I mean, I don't want to go as far as setting fireworks off outside their team's hotels at night, or greeting them at the airport with "Welcome to Hell" signs or anything like that. But I think it's become too comfortable, hasn't it, Willie?
It has. I mean, like when I was a season ticket holder, it was during Gordon Strachan's time and Neil Lennon, and like during Gordon Strachan's time, teams didn't want to come to Celtic Park. I mean, you would draw Celtic and they would go, "Oh, right, here we go. We're in for a really, really good night, good atmosphere, but we're in for a hell of a game too." And some big teams came and some big teams fell by the wayside. AC Milan, Barcelona, Shakhtar Donetsk, Benfica themselves. Like, I mean, they just didn't enjoy coming to play at Parkhead because the noise, the Man United of the world, like, we want to get back to that. And when we go to the new format of the Champions League next season, the season after, we're going to need to get that because that is going to be key to getting into the playoff spots. So we need to get it back. We need to get that fear factor rather than the wow factor.
Yeah, I remember Milan. Sorry, I just was thinking of. Do you remember the goalkeeper?
Dida. I was there.
That wasn't you, Willie, was it?
No, it wasn't me. No, I was on the other side of the park. I was.
He was running too fast to be Willie.
Definitely. I'd have fallen over the barrier and got battered by the students straight away. Like Staunchy McStaunch laying it into me. Like, oh no, I'm done.
Yeah, I always remember when we played Bayern Munich in the Champions League during the Martin O'Neill era, and they drew nothing each with us, and they done a lap of honour at the end in front of their fans because they got a draw at Celtic Park. Those years seem like a long time ago, and something we need to get it back. So we missed. We've done a slide that we've actually missed out here in the presentation, and that was on social media following. So we'll sort of talk through this one and where we are in relation to that. And I think this surprised me a little bit. Now we've got 4 million social media followers. The biggest amount among these clubs that we're looking at were Galatasaray with 40 million. Ajax just below them on 23 million, ranging all the way down. I think we are sitting something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 6th in that list, neck and neck with PSV and Feyenoord, with 1 million more than our old friends from across the city. So what does that tell you, Steve? Do you think that tells you we're not doing social media properly, or we just don't have as many fans as we think?
It's probably a bit of both, really. I mean, let's be honest, we're in a bit of an echo chamber here, right? So, we talk about, Glasgow Celtic, the only club for me and you, and, and we're all passionate about our club, and we probably are a little bit blinkered, but the reality is there's a lot of clubs out there with some huge followings as well. Now, you can argue the toss about whether being manager of Ajax has the same pressure on it as being manager of Celtic, or whatever it is. But, when you look at that and you see 25 million followers of Ajax on socials, versus Celtic's 4 million, that's quite a stark difference. Galatasaray got 10 times as many followers as us. And honestly, followers on social media, it's not the be all and end all, and I'm sure there's better ways of measuring how big a brand we are. But it's a measure, and the reality is, all the Portuguese clubs are pretty much bigger than us, in terms of, their followers. And I'm sure there's reasons for that, so the Portuguese link to Brazil and South America, I think they gather a lot of followers through that link. And obviously Galatasaray from Turkey, Turkey's 85 million population, versus Scotland's 5 million, but ignore all that just for a second. You've got Galatasaray with 10 times as many followers on socials than Celtic have. So it's just a way of maybe a little bit of a reality check to say, while Celtic is, flowing through our veins and means everything to us, the reality is, when it comes to the world stage, I don't think we're as dominant a club in terms of brand as we think we are.
Yeah, I think that's a good point about the populations there, because we are a smaller country than most of the other countries. They're not all of them by any means, but certainly most of the other countries. It's interesting that we're still at 4 million social media followers, even after we've signed the players from Japan and South Korea. I'm not sure whether we got a bump from that, and whether before that we might have been even lower, to be honest.
We did. Yeah, we did. So we're actually one of the top Japanese or European sides followed in Japan. We haven't got a South Korean specific socials yet, but I would imagine if these two signings come in, you'd like to think the club would be thinking that way. But no, we absolutely did get a bump from that, and obviously the club are out there right now doing their stuff, so hopefully we'll get a further bump from that as well.
Yeah, hopefully Willie will be up to 40 million by the end of the week then.
Aye, well, you never know. There's quite a big population out there in South Korea that could just start following us.
But it's important, though. It definitely is important in this day and age. Even for old guys like us, we can appreciate the importance of social media engagement. And I think it's something the club. I mean, for where I'm sitting, they seem to do it quite well. I think the club's social media teams do a good job. But we all, there is potential for growth there. So that's definitely an area which we could grow, without a doubt. So we'll move on to the next slide, which we have, which is on revenue. Let's pull this up just now. And Steve, do you want to talk us through this one?
Yeah. So look, just so we're clear, this is measuring the revenue from season 21-22. So most clubs run the football season as their financial year as well, right? So, let's be honest, I think we would all prioritize success on the pitch rather than in the boardroom or on the balance sheet, or however you want to express it. But again, I don't think the two things are competing priorities. At the end of the day, if we're successful and we're bringing in the revenue, our whole purpose as a football club is to put success on the park. Bringing in the revenue should lead to success on the park. That's the argument. All right, so just a quick caveat. There was 4 or 5 sides that we just couldn't get the data for whatever reason. They're either privately owned organizations or they just haven't published the figures. But you can see here for season 21-22, which I'd argue was probably a middle of the road season for us. So yes, we qualified for Champions League. Actually, hang on, did we?
No, I don't think we did, Steve. I think that was
No.
Angie's first.
You're right.
Season,
yeah, so
wasn't it?
And season 1. Yeah, sorry, Steve. But look, it's probably a middle of the road season. We do expect 22-23 to come in stronger. But you can see here the clubs of the data that we've got available. We're probably just slightly above middle of the pack. Yeah. The Rangers revenue there is probably a high point for them. So I think this was when they had their long European run. So this was probably about as high a revenue point as they were going to get. I think the reality is for season 22-23 with Champions League revenue, we'll probably be about the 110, 115 million. So what was interesting to me though, sorry, just very quickly is in my mind, I was thinking, Ajax and, when we started this exercise, I was thinking Ajax and Benfica, they're the European peers. The reality is, they're almost double our revenue, so they're way ahead of us in terms of revenue generating. And this is before we look at player trading. So player trading doesn't really play into this too much, so the reality is, I don't know whether I was being naive in terms of thinking an Ajax or a Benfica are sensible, points of reference for us. Maybe they're actually disappearing over the horizon the same way as the EPL clubs are, etc.
Yeah, and Willie, we can see in the box there, Celtic 51 million euros from matchday revenue, Ajax 34 million matchday revenue, and for commercial, Ajax 81 million euros and Celtic 38 million, and broadcasting 74 million and Celtic 15 million only. So you can see that the big difference there is broadcasting and commercial revenue, and in particular the TV deal, I think, is probably the main driver in that. So obviously we've got a terrible TV deal in Scotland, and that really does hamper us when we come up, to compare ourselves against a club like Ajax. Is that a fair comment, Willie?
Oh, absolutely, it's a fair comment. I mean, I've got some of Benfica's figures here in front of me. If you look at their commercial revenue for that year, I mean, Benfica got 31 million, and we had 38 million euros. So commercially, we're on Porto, they were on 43 million euros, and Sporting Lisbon also on 31. So commercially, we're about the same level as the Portuguese teams, but when it comes into broadcasting, they just dwarf us. I mean, Benfica's getting clear of 103 million more a year for their TV deal than we are. It's frightening. When I was looking into it, what I found was Benfica, the Portuguese league, they get 190 million, I think it's a season, and that's just for Benfica, Sporting and Porto's away games. The 3 big teams there get to sell their home games for their own separate TV channels. And they all signed big 10, 12-year deals. I think Sporting got 446 million euros for a 12-year deal, which covers shirt sponsorship and revenue for all home matches. So we really, really are lagging behind in the commercial, in the broadcasting rights. And it's so bad that we get less money for TV than the English Football League, Serie B in Italy, and Brazil's second division league. So our TV deal is just a pittance compared to some of these bigger leagues that we're trying to aspire to be close to.
It's kind of interesting though. So if you look at, I think that's fascinating, Willie. Right. So but if you look at Ajax, between match day and commercial, they're what, about 111, 115 million or whatever it is, and Celtic are about 90 million. Right. So the reality is we're not a million miles off if you combine match day and commercial. But the broadcasting, they're more than 5 times, or they're just about 5 times our deal,
Yeah.
And I know, we laugh at the Scottish setup, and we joke about, Doncaster and, all the deals that get done and all the rest of it. But the reality is that's a big part of that. And there is European broadcasting in there as well, so it does, performance in Europe does feed into that as well. But the reality is we're hamstrung, really, at the beginning of every season.
Yeah, I think the thing that jumps out for me is this is obviously, as we mentioned, in a non-Champions League qualifying season. Now, if, as you mentioned, we had qualified for the group stages and what we expect to see this year, and probably offer strong player sales as well, I would expect us to be up between 120 and 130 million euros in revenue. I might be a little bit off with that, but plus or minus 5 million or so, but it won't be far away. But that would take us up to 4th out of all those teams. And it'd be interesting to see, whether Ajax, I can't remember if that was the season they got to the Champions League semi-final or not, or how they performed in Europe that year. So Champions League qualification for us, particularly in light of our pathetic broadcasting deal, is absolutely crucial. And qualifying from the group stages would be, it would send us, soaring up that table if we had a deep run into the Champions League latter stages. So that's what kind of jumped out for me. So that's revenue. Now when I look at here in the next slide, what are we paying our players in terms of wages, and how does that compare with other teams in the peer group? So Willie, do you want to talk us through the two graphics we have up here?
Yeah, on the top there, you can see the sort of wage cost each year. Benfica are spending 113 million euros. Ajax 109, Porto 83, Celtic coming in 4th, spending 70 million euros. Club Brugge just behind us, Sporting Lisbon just behind them, and Rangers just behind that. And then there's a bit of drop off there, 10 million down to PSV, and then you go Feyenoord, and then it sort of gradually declines as you go down through the peer group. But then you look at the wages turnover, percentage of wages to revenue. Sporting Braga are paying 83% of their revenue on wages. And you look at where Celtic are, we spend 67% of our revenue on wages, which is a lot. So some of the other teams in there, Rangers are spending 63%. Most of them are soft loans, I think. And then you go down. Ajax, due to their commercial revenue, 58% they're paying less of their turnover. Benfica as well, slightly. Yeah, they're the same as us. Anything you want to add on that, Steve?
Look, it's probably the top chart that we should focus on, right? So in absolute terms, Celtic, out those 20 clubs, and again, the caveat, we couldn't get data for 5 of the clubs. So out those 15 clubs, as it were, we're the 4th top paying club in that benchmark. And yet, if you think all the way back to the beginning of the conversation, we are bottom of the coefficient league. So to my mind, we've got the capacity to pay. We're probably paying poorly in terms of, we've got an overinflated squad and, whatnot. But the reality is, we've got the capacity to pay. We could be paying, if we had the right shape squad or whatever, we could be paying the same as a Porto or the same as a Lisbon or, whatever it is. So I think this is actually one, where we're looking at those European peers and thinking, we're in the right mix here. Mm-hmm. In terms of the bottom half, the wages to revenue ratio or the percentages, that was probably a middle of the road season for us in terms of revenue. To Stephen's point, next season or 22-23, so the next reporting season, the revenue will jump, significantly, and that will mean that revenue percentage will drop as well. So I don't think there's anything to be worried about there in terms of us sitting at 67%. We'll probably see that drop down, quite significantly. So it's not something to worry about. But that is one of the factors that UEFA use in terms of some of their financial fair play and the likes. So that's why we've included that there.
Yeah, that mid 50 to mid 60 seems to be sort of mean average for the peer group, doesn't it? Like, it's we're on 67, and you go down all the way to Sporting Lisbon down there on 55. It's sort of round about the same sort of that 10% there.
Yeah.
10,
Yeah,
12.
I think it's clear from this that we're not getting banged for our buck, really, when you consider that we're bottom of all these, we're holding up all these teams in the coefficient chart. We should be doing much better, and clearly we're not. Whatever we're spending on wages, we're not spending it wisely. So there's definitely room for improvement there. So moving on, again, we'll have a look at transfers, how much we're spending, but actually buying players. And first of all, we'll look at the net spend. And Steve, do you want to talk us through this one?
Look, I don't think we dwell on this one. This is, just so we're clear, when we talk about net spend, this is effectively showing how much we spent offset by what we brought in. So let's say, and it's measured over the last 5 seasons. So let's say, last season we spent 20 million, but we brought in 30 million. Then we've got, effectively 10 million net income. Now, that's a particularly bad example because we net spent about 20 million over the 5 seasons. So what that means is net income. What that means is over those last 5 seasons, we have actually brought in 20 million euros more than we've spent in terms of transfers. So, look, I don't think it's easy to make the comparisons here, because the reality is, as we'll see in a moment, some of those clubs at the top end of that table, they are far outspending us, but they are even more bringing in, transfer income, so it's offset, more than offset. So probably not one to dwell on, but just useful just to see, how we compare the bottom end. So technically, we're net spending more than most of those clubs that we would consider as European peers, albeit that when we look at absolute spend, we're not quite, as we'll see in a moment.
Okay, so let's look at that then. Let's look at actual spend, which is the next graphic we have. So that's showing us, it looks like kind of middle of the road there, maybe edging towards the top of what we actually spend. But again, there's an awful lot, for me anyway, there's an awful lot of teams there who spend less than us, who do better than us in Europe. Is that fair to say, Wally?
Yeah, it's absolutely fair to say. I mean, when you're spending double the amount of some of these teams, you're expecting to be getting further than them in Europe. So, yeah, it's kind of disappointing in a big way. But when you look at even the Rangers get into the Europa League final and they've spent kind of half of what we've spent. Red Star Belgrade as well, Dinamo Zagreb. These teams will get into the Champions League and they'll get to like the latter stages of the Europa League and things like that, whereas we seem to crumble as soon as we get into our knockout stage. And it is very disappointing to see that, because you are a middle of the road team here, so we should be looking at decent results in the knockout stages, at least the Europa League. You know what I mean? To be pushing to the quarters at least on this sort of spending.
Yeah, and Steve, do you think does this show us that we need to spend more, or is it showing us that we're just spending in the wrong places or with the wrong players? So
we will look in a minute at our spend history, going back more than these 5 years. Oh my God, there's some names there that are a bit.
I'll put a health warning up before we show that one.
Please call if you're traumatized by this. Well, look, it's probably a combination of things, right? So, look, for years, it seems to be that we looked a little bit on our doorstep and we were quite happy buying from the English Championship or, whatever it was. And I don't know, it's an overly inflated market, not just in terms of transfer pricing, but also in terms of wages and whatnot. I think Ange obviously came in, breath of fresh air. He looked into new markets, and I think it'll be really interesting to see whether I think we are seeing that continue beyond the Ange era. We hopefully get these two South Korean lads signing. And we seem to be looking into markets beyond that, and it just represents better value. So if you chat to Liam, who's on Celtic Down Under, he's quite often chatting about the value and the kind of transfer market from a Japanese perspective, and what represents good value. And look, we're not unique in that. I think others are looking in that same kind of markets, etc. But the reality is, we've spent, 107 million over 5 years. We're middle of that pack, and yet we're sitting bottom of that coefficient league, with all those teams sitting above us. We have not spent wisely. I don't think anyone could really draw that conclusion.
Okay, so we'll move on and we'll drill down into a little bit about what we actually have spent on the next slide. And this shows us, when our top spending season was and our top spends in that season. That was 2001 when Martin O'Neill was here. We signed Chris Sutton for €9.5 million. It was around about £6.5 million at the time, and that was our transfer record at the time. Interestingly enough, we didn't break that transfer record till 2019 when we signed Odsonne Edouard permanently, and I think that was about £9 million we paid for him, if I remember correctly. And we haven't broken it again since. So almost a quarter of a century spans this graph here, and we've only broken our transfer record once. So yeah, there is a few horrific names in there, and so what does this tell you, Willie? What are you taking from this?
What I'm taking from this is that we haven't spent wisely at all. You look at the tail off. Martin O'Neill seemed to get all his money right at the start, and then it was he didn't get much after that. But then under Gordon Strachan and Lenny, I think John Park was a scout there, and he did a decent job, and you see some decent revenue figures. So we spent a bit of money, but we got some money coming back in as well from player sales, especially when Lennon was there. I mean, you had Victor Wanyama sold for 14.5 million, Fraser Foster for 12.5 million euros, Virgil van Dijk 15.7 million euros. So that player trading model did seem to perk up during John Park's. Is it John Park? His name was John Park's time there. Yeah. But then Brendan Rodgers came in, and when Brendan came in, the spending sort of plateaued. I mean, there wasn't so much going out as there was being spent on players coming in. And for me, Lee Congratton just wasn't a good head of recruitment at all. Some of the players, we went through it a couple of weeks ago, Brendan Rodgers signing. Some of the names on that list were absolutely frightening to think that they actually played in Celtic jersey. Ebu Kassi's there on that list there, you know what I mean? Charlie Masonda, Martin Bio as well, you know what I mean? That comes down to Lee Congratton. He went out and scouted these guys and said, yeah, let's get them in the building. And then when Lee Congratton left, we got in... I can't remember the guy's name now. Taking a wee mental blank there.
The English guy, wasn't it? Yeah.
Came from Nicky Hammond, wasn't it?
Hammond, yeah, Nick Hammond. That was him.
Nick Hammond, and even he spent a bit of money. We got a bit of money coming back in sales from players. Well, Kieran Tierney went away, but that €7.5 million for a homegrown player. Jeremy Frimpong came in and went out quite quickly. But then Nicky Hammond, his legacy as well is like Chris Julian, Albion Ayeti, Vasias Barkas. You know what I mean? I just don't think we spent the money wisely. And looking at Ange's sort of signings, yeah, 2/3 of them have probably been hits. A third of them have been misses, but you haven't lost a lot of money on the misses. So it seems to be on the graph there on the bottom. You do see that it seems to be moving in the right way. It seems to be on the up again. You know what I mean? The spending's going up, but also what will be coming in from player sales will also go up when you look at what we're taking for Jota, Edward, Juranovic. It seems to be sort of working in the right direction at the moment.
Yeah, and Steve, what do you think we would see if we overlaid the coefficient chart, historical chart onto this? Do you think we would see a sort of similar pattern?
Oh gosh, don't know. I'm not
so
sure.
We had
Stephen,
we had a high point during the Martin O'Neill years when we spent 31 million euros on players, and it's kind of tailed off and bounced around at a lower level since then and been on a steady decline. And you're right to say we are starting to pick up now, but we've yet to see that bounce with the coefficient. But is there anything else jumps out at you, Steve?
Yeah, 2004, 2005, according to Transfer Market, we didn't spend a single dollar, a single euro, which is a bit stark. But which is a bit of a caveat, actually. This is data sourced from Transfer Market, and in fairness, their transfer stuff is normally fairly accurate.
Was that the Willow Flood window? Might have
been. I'm not sure. But look, I mean, the interesting thing, right? So we're going back like 20 odd years, 25 years, and the reality is 20 years ago, we spent more than we've ever done. And you think of the effect of inflation, you think of, just general inflation, but then football inflation, the reality is in real terms, we must be spending far less than we were then, even a big spending year like 22, 23, bringing in Jota and CCV perms on permanent deals, we still spent less in absolute terms than we did in 2000, 2001. And that's before you even think about inflation. So it is crazy. I mean, when you really think about it and you think about the decline in our coefficient, it shouldn't be that surprising, really, when you look at that and you think, all these other clubs, as we'll see in a couple of slides' time, these other clubs are just dwarfing our spend. But we'll look at that in a moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, Steve. When you look at the list of players that you've highlighted there from 2000, 2001, I think the interesting point is when those players all left the club, we got next to nothing for them. I think you would probably get less than €1 million between them all when they left, and most of them left for free. And when you extrapolate that to today, we are spending much less than we were then. And it's clear as day that was the last time we were really a force in Europe to any great level, reaching the UEFA Cup final, and that was certainly a high point this century anyway.
I think, sorry, Stephen, sorry to interrupt, but the other thing that jumps out to me, and in a minute we're going to look at our income. So this is our transfer spend. In a minute we'll look at our transfer income. We clearly did not have a player trading model. I know that's a kind of fancy term and all the rest of it, but we did not have a player trading model probably up until 2015, 2014, 15 or whatever it is. We stumbled upon a Virgil van Dijk. We sold him arguably less than we should have got for him. But the reality is most of the sales that we make, and we'll look at them in a moment, were probably at the player's behest. The player wanted away, or the player, wanted, to move clubs or whatever it was. It wasn't really us in the driving seat, managing a player trading model. It was more us reacting. And the reality is, and again, we'll look at it in a moment, until then, we didn't have a player trading model. I think we'd be kidding ourselves if we, claim that we did. But yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the name Mo Bangura there. And Mo Bangura actually entered my thoughts today. I was reading an article, it was all over Twitter about this, the new guy we're signing from Korea, is it Kwon, the defensive midfielder? And he's burst through the doors and he's telling everyone he's going to be the best player at Celtic and he's going to move on to the EPL or the Bundesliga. So, fair play to him for confidence. But I seem to remember Mo Bangura saying something very similar when he signed for Celtic. I might be mistaken there, but it was certainly somebody like that.
I thought you were going to say he was claiming to be, he was going to be the best player at Celtic since Mo Bangura. I was going to say, oh my God.
It's the other Mo Bangura. Is that not the guy we signed the wrong one? Is that right, Wally?
Aye, there is strong. The wrong one. Is he not recommended by Henrik Larsson too? Came out the Swedish leagues,
yeah.
and then played against
was,
us in a Champions League qualifier on loan from us.
That's right. Yeah. Why, Henrik? Why? All right. So we'll draw a line under that to protect the innocent, and we'll move on to what we've actually earned from transfers. And we'll bring up this next graphic and look at, and it's clear as day, we haven't actually started. We didn't start selling for big money until the sort of 2010 onwards. And it's been a fairly consistent with a with a little blimp in 17, 18, and 18, 19 when we probably didn't have much available to sell then. So it's clear we have got a player trading model underway just now. So what's your take on that, Willie?
Yeah, I mean, like I've said earlier, we do seem to be improving on this player trading model side of it. Like the Brendan Rodgers era, it kind of seemed to get pushed to one side while we tried to persevere, winning, the pushing towards 10, but it quickly fell by the wayside, and the pound sign started rolling in again, and Peter Lawwell just started getting greedy and start selling players. So. We really need to have a more aggressive sort of approach to this player trading, because you can see the benefits of it. The more you speculate, the more you accumulate as you go in this market. So for me, we need to be more aggressive on it, because you can see the rewards. The more you take in, the more you sell. The better the name you get for yourself as you're selling. You know what I mean? Players will come back, teams will come back to you for another player, knowing that the player that they bought, or they've seen players in their league that have come from your team doing well. They'll come to you and buy players off you. So the more aggressive you are, the better it is in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Steve, the one year that stands out above all others is 21-22. When we sold Chris Ayer and Odsonne Edouard for a combined total of €38 million. And that's significant because that was the first time when we signed Odsonne Edouard for €9 million or pounds, sorry. That was the time when we did break our transfer record and we were able to flip him for a significant profit. Do you think that's significant?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, to Willie's point, the whole point of having a player trading model is to generate funds so that we can invest to put better talent on the pitch. That's the whole point of it. It's not, you don't player trade for player trade's sake. You need to have a purpose for it. But yeah, I mean, Odsonne Edouard, we spent big on Odsonne. I think it was, what was it in the end? I know obviously we had him on loan initially, and I think, what did we spend? Was it 9 million?
I think it was £9 million.
Yeah.
I think it was. I think that was a lot. The fee was agreed before with PSG, and we ended up paying it. And the interesting thing about Odsonne Edouard is we kept him a season too long, and I think I think everybody's in agreement on that. And I think if we'd sold him 12 months previously when we should have, we'd have got more money for him. I think that's pretty much guaranteed.
But it's got echoes of the Jota deal as well, in terms of, player in a B side, or, whatever it was. They clearly saw him as a talented player, but didn't fit into their plans for the first side, or they were putting him out on loan to prove himself or whatever. And we, sounds bad, but we flipped him. We gave him a stage. We showcased his talents, and then we flipped him for a significant profit. And so for Edouard, we probably ended up clearing the best part of €7 or €8 million. For Jota, obviously, even more than that. So it is a model that can work. But again, I don't want to make it sound like that's the whole reason for being. You only do that to develop, to get funds so that you can develop more players or buy more players to put talent on the pitch. That's the whole reason for doing it. But the other thing the other thing my eye's drawn to is the last 3 years of Martin O'Neill's tenure. Where we literally got no income whatsoever. Which is
my eyes were drawn to that as well, Steve. And can I ask you, who is Brian Prunty?
Well, so just to be clear, he's a made-up person. No, he's not really.
It's not. He came out of the youth development. He was a youth player with Celtic,
right? So just to be clear, what we've done is list the top 2 purchases or the top 2 sales for each of the years. So you're saying, we got 38 million, for Odson and Chris Ayer. Well, actually, that also includes Ryan Christie as well, and whoever else we saw.
Right, okay, yep.
So just to be clear, but 2003, 2004, Brian Prunty. Yeah, there you go. He went to Aberdeen for a free transfer. Literally, according to Transfer Market, we did not bring in a single dollar or a single euro rather that season, which is bizarre in itself. But then for it to be one of 3 years in a row, where we didn't, I'm surprised we didn't get in for Raphael Scheidt or for Jonathan Gould. But it's pretty lean times, to be honest. And I know we can say, we weren't running a player trading model and all the rest of it, but that does look like really poor management, just generally, in terms of managing your assets and trying to bring in income for the club. Looks a bit embarrassing now.
Yeah, it certainly does. The last 5 years on there have sort of rescued the whole chart, to be honest with you. We actually seem to be heading in the right direction finally. But let's have a look at the next slide, which is what we how this looks compared to some of our European peers, which we have here: Ajax, Benfica, on the same sort of chart as Celtic, and clearly, bar a few outliers there, we can see that both the teams are spending significantly more than us. Is that fair to say, Steve?
Yeah. So, look, I think this was meant to be a bit of look, in 2000, 2001, we were the top spending between those other two, And again, honestly, I came into this exercise thinking they were our natural benchmarks. I'm not sure they are, because if you look at the right-hand side of the chart, they're outspending us by 3 or 4 times, So the reality is, and this is before you think about, their homegrown talent that they're, selling, which I'm guessing is funding some of this, etc. But the reality is, they've just gone on to another level, compared to us. And probably the inflection point is right about that 2007, 2008 kind of period, where you start to see Benfica, spending pretty much what we spent, last year is a huge spending year for us, 30 odd million, and they just go on from there. They pretty much consistently, lift from there. And Ajax the same, so probably not one to dwell on, but the reality is, it's been a long time since they were sensible peers for us in terms of transfer spend. It's been probably 20 odd years, since we could sensibly say that.
And Willie, what's your take on these figures?
Yeah, they're dwarfing us big time. That just goes to show, Benfica have a really aggressive player trading model. Last season, their biggest buy was in 22-23. It was Enzo Fernandez from River Plate for 44.25 million euros, and their highest sale that season was Enzo Fernandez to Chelsea in January for 121 million euros. So they're not frightened to flip a player. And the other thing, the youth development at Benfica is phenomenal. I mean, they've made around over half a billion euros in a decade selling homegrown players. Wow Felix went to Atletico for 127 million euros. You've got Ruben Diaz went to Man City, 71.6 million euros. Ederson to Man City, 40 million. it just goes to show you, if you have a really good youth development system in place, there is a lot of money to be plundered there too. Like, I think $500 million, that's 556.6 million they've made in 10 years. Like, somebody needs to get Peter Law a plane ticket to Portugal and have a look at this setup, because that's the sort of thing he dreams of. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. All right,
Yes.
so we'll move on to our final slide, which is kind of like a sort of consolidated scorecard for all this stuff, and see where we are. I think we can see that we're right at the bottom of the most important one, which is the European coefficient, which basically measures how you're performing on the field. But we sit either slightly above middle or near enough the top in all the other metrics. So that tells its own story, really, and it's a story of underperformance in Europe. So what's our final sort of summary of all this, and what can we take away, and what do we need to improve on? I'll go to you first, Steve.
Yeah, it's a bit sobering, isn't it? I mean, look, for me, it probably shows what we've all kind of intuitively felt for some time, which is, these are sensible peers of ours. We should be performing as well as a Copenhagen or a Young Boys or Sporting Lisbon, and even if this has been a bit of an eye-opener for me personally in terms of Ajax and Benfica, maybe they're not sensible benchmarks for us, fine, move on. But the others, yeah, they're all sensible benchmarks. But then you look at this and everything, if you hit that last column, the coefficient, you'd look at that and you'd go, okay, yeah, so we're, top third for brand, and we're top or thereabouts for ground, and, top third for revenue and wages. And, you go, oh, yeah, great. And then we are absolute bottom for coefficient. So that to me just says, frankly, mismanagement, very, very poor performance. The tools have been there, the revenue has been there. We have paid the wages. The supporters have done their stuff by turning up and buying the kits, no matter how ridiculous some of them are. We've actually spent reasonable transfer sums, but it's just not happened on the pitch. So when we hear Brendan coming in and Brendan talking about, right, okay, now is the time to redress some of that or to lift European performance, that to me gives me a bit of hope, because I think there's a realization there that, we have underperformed, frankly, woefully underperformed, and we need to lift it, would be the stark, the stark realization. And I mean, and sorry, without being all doom and gloom, I think there are positive signs there. We have traded well over the last few years. Like selling Juranovic and Gigi, mid-season, to me, I know in a funny sort of way, but that to me is a positive thing. That says, right, fine, the right time to sell these assets is now. And we invested that money really well. Look at Alistair Johnson. I think, frankly, that was an upgrade. So we can do it. I just hope that we continue on that kind of trajectory under Brendan, and we don't revert back to, the let's shop in the English Championship. Let's limit our horizons to that. Hopefully, we continue on the trajectory we're on.
Yeah, and Willie, what do you think's been, in your opinion, has been behind our failings in the champion? I mean, I know it's a very complex question, but if you pick the sort of biggest one, where do you think we failed over the past years in improving our results in Europe? Was there any one particular to blame, or was it just a sort of club thing in general?
Sorry, I've got a wee cat behind me. I think, I don't know if you can hear it there on the mic or not. For me, I think scouting and player development is where we're failing. We're failing our peer groups big time. You look at Braga last season, SC Braga, they regularly compete with Sporting Lisbon for best of the rest in Portugal, and they made like 50-60 million from selling youth develop players. For me, that's one key area where other teams are outstripping us money-wise coming in. Celtic have only sold 3 players over the past decade for cash sales that have been disclosed. I mean, you might have had Dylan McGeoch and that have gone for 50, 60,000 to Hibs or whatever, but Kieran Tierney, Tony Watt and Liam Henderson are the only players that's come out of the youth development scheme that we've made any sort of money on. That for me is alarming, like, you know what I mean? Because we do sort of put an emphasis on youth, how we would like to develop them. We're trying to get the B team up and running, trying to get them sort of going. But I think for the first team, it would be scouting. As I said earlier on, Nicky Hammond and Lee Congerton didn't do a very good job. They brought in some amount of dross. And well, we've started to see under Mark Law an improvement, and hopefully that improvement will continue because it will lead to better results on the pitch.
So yeah, Steve, one area apart from the coefficient where we are lacking a little bit behind some of the other clubs is transfer spend. So this is sort of like a hot topic for today, and a lot of people being alarmed at the moment that we haven't spent that much money yet in the transfer window. There was a lot of rumours going around, and it was just conjecture really that we were going to break our transfer record several times during this window. Hasn't happened yet, might still happen. But do you think it's important for us to be spending more money on players to get us up that chart a little bit, to get maybe closer to Benfica and Ajax, even though we're not in a position now to get up to their levels of what they're spending and receiving? Is it something we should be moving towards?
So, look, I'm kind of more in the spend it wisely kind of camp, so, there's a lot of risk involved in running out and spending, 15 million euros on, a striker. I saw a thread on Twitter the other day, and apologies, I can't recall who it was. And they were saying, look at the top spend for this age group, in what we would call addressable targets, so they're not going to the big 5, they're going in that 6 to 8 or 9 to 15, kind of league space or whatever. And it whittled down, and there was like 3 players that we could have bought for similar funds, last year, whatever. And like one of them did their cruciate ligament in day 1 of the season. One, is just shockingly underperformed, and one of them hardly played a game, and frankly for us, if we ran out and spent that money and, had those results, that would be, that'd be shattering. So to me, I think the approach in the last couple of years has been really smart. Try before you buy. You bring in a Jota and a Carter Vickers and they excel. Then fine. Push the boat out and spend the money on the transfer and also on the wages. Or you go to Japan and you bring in some real talent there. But you're not spending crazy money. You're not spending, the 15, 20 million euros, which is a lot of money for us. Let's be clear. So if it doesn't quite, work, then, it's not a drama. So, Ideguchi, it hasn't quite worked for him. Fine. It's not, season defining in terms of the finances or whatever, but for every Ideguchi, under the last couple of seasons, we had 2 or 3 Gyogos or Hitates or, Dysons or whatever, So to my mind, I think our approach has been good. I'd rather we continued along those lines. I mean, fine, maybe we should be shopping in the, 5 to 8 million euros kind of market rather than the 3 to 4 million euros market, but I'd rather do that and spend wisely rather than, just spend for the sake of it.
Yeah, for me, I would probably take a little bit of a different point of view there. If you look at our performance last year in the Champions League, we did okay up to a point. I think the systems were good. I think the tactics were okay. I think we just ran out of talent at sort of key points in certain games. We just needed a little bit better players. Now, I don't believe all the guys we've signed so far this summer, I think they all fit the bill in terms of what we're trying to do with a player trading model. They're all at the right age, they're all at the right value, resale values there, etc. But I really don't think they're going to give us that extra bit of quality we need to turn like a draw into a win, or a defeat into a draw, and get points from there. And I was listening to the Huddle breakdown this week, and they made exactly the same point, that if you want better players in general, you have to pay more money. Now it's not an exact science, and it doesn't work all the time, but for every Albion Ajeti who you pay big money for and is a flop, there's an Odsonne Edouard who you pay big money for and he's a massive success, almost a real hero at the club, and moves on for big money. So what's your take on that, Willie?
I agree with you. I think the scouting, again, we go back to the scouting, like Albion Ajeti and players like that weren't scouted properly. Albion Ajeti was a West Ham reserve striker, wasn't getting a game for them, and we still paid $5 million for him. Why? Because he's a Premier League reserve striker. Let's give $5 million for that? No, thank you. If you're going to spend money, last season we spent $7 million on Carter Vickers, we spent $7 million on Jota. That's the kind of spending we're going to look to, and as the player trading model goes, and you're more successful at that, you just make incremental increases. Like this season coming, we might buy 2 players at 10 million, and a couple more at 2 or 3 million to come in and bolster the squad as we have done. For me, I've said a few times, a goalkeeper would make a big difference. If we could go out and spend 10 million on the guy, the Croatian international keeper, I think he went to Fenerbahce in the end. But that's the sort of moves you should be looking at, right? You say, right, let's get the core of the team, let's spend big on the core of the team, and then see what we can do around that. So if you go for is it Fabian Ryder, the boy? I've seen some YouTube videos of him. He looks a tasty player. If he's going to cost us 15 million, you're going to push the boat out for him. He really does fit the player trading model. He's young. He'll have a big sell on. As long as it fits into place with that, there could be little risk with it. You know what I mean? Because the English teams do look at us now and say, right, okay, Celtic players are pretty good. We will quite happily buy from Celtic because their players come down here and they generally do not too bad. They'll go to other countries as well and go and do not too bad as well. So we have a good name for ourselves when it comes to selling them on. So if you want to start putting, like I say, that incremental increase onto each season, like this last season's big spends was 7, this season could be like 10, 15, and that could sit for a couple of seasons and then you move on to the next level. So yeah, just incremental increases. So.
Yeah, that's pretty much where I am. I think, in my view, it's wrong that we've only broken our transfer spend record once in quarter of a century. I think we should be doing it every couple of years. If not every year, we should be spending a little bit more. When you consider, I was reading today that when Henrik Larsson signed his new deal with Celtic back in 2001, he was on 40 grand a week. And if you fast forward, 23 years later, our top earners, I don't know what McGregor's on now with his new contract, but he wasn't earning that before. So where wages have gone nowhere, they've kind of plateaued. We've seen from the graphics that we showed, we're not spending as much as we have at certain times. We're not spending as much as the teams at the top of our peer group, and we're not bringing in as much as teams at the top of our peer group. So I think that's where we're failing. And I think for the past 5-6 years, maybe even longer, and I think the finger, I don't want to get down to personalities here, but a lot of the fingers need to be pointed at Peter Lawwell here. And that we had a great opportunity when Rangers were liquidated to have a free crack at the Champions League. And I think there was an argument there that was the time when we should have been implementing a proper player trading model, and we probably did it 5 or 6 years too late, and we're playing catch up then. And a lot of the nervousness around what we're spending this summer is probably based on the fact that Peter Lawwell's back in the building. And people may be thinking, we're getting back into old habits. Have you got any fears on that, Steve, or are you quite comfortable?
Yeah, no. I mean, it kind of for me. It goes back to that. Am I happy to be 3 points better than the Huns across the city, and that's fine for me. Therefore I'm going to be domestically successful, and I'll get a crack at Europe, and albeit I might be half baked in that crack at Europe or whatever. If do you know what? If that's what you're happy with, then you're always going to be that. You're always going to be looking at this season and thinking, well, actually, we've got a really successful squad. From last season, we've only really lost Jota and Aaron Moy in terms of the talent. So will we get away with Tilio as being a replacement, or whatever? Which is a bit of a nonsense. Whereas if you take the other view and say, actually, let's measure ourselves against European talent. Let's not look down on them. Let's look up at an Ajax and a Benfica and aspire to that. And, if you're going to do that, then you are going to stretch the model, each year, or you're going to stretch it and say, okay, well, actually, here's talent that we can sensibly bring in, to Willie's point, and fine, in 2 years' time, because a lot of these players are not going to stay much longer than that, we can sell it, the individual at a profit. Happy days. But you're right, Stephen, let's be honest, we saw behaviours, during, them going bust. We should have been absolutely stretched out of sight, at that point. We could have done some really, really smart stuff, and frankly, we didn't. And there are worries, that some of those characters are, kicking around again. But, hopefully, we've got stronger governance. I think Nicholson is CEO. He goes about his job pretty quietly, but pretty effectively. I think Mark Lowell appears to be a smart operator. I think Brendan won't suffer it. So hopefully there's enough governance and structure in place that mean, we're not going to revert to, some of those poor habits.
Yeah, so we'll probably start to wind things up a little bit here. I'll just ask you this one, Wally. What are you hoping to see from the rest of the transfer window? Given that, we'll take it as the two Korean lads have been done, and that's signing. That brings a total of 4 players that we've brought in, which is reasonably consistent with where we were at this time last year. So what are you hoping to see from the the final couple of months of the transfer window?
I think we will break our transfer record this season, and I think a centre midfielder will come in. I think a goalkeeper will come in. I think probably another wide man and a second striker to feed off Kyogo will come in. I'm not pushing the panic button yet like some people are. I mean, we don't start our Champions League campaign till September. There's no need. There's no like seasons gone by when we're going into qualifiers like, we need to get these players in now. We need to get them in now. We have time on our hands. We can sit and wait and get the right guys in. But I think the big spending will come. I'm quite confident it will happen. I'm not, like I say, there's people on socials at the moment are getting a bit antsy because Rangers seem to have done all their business already and we haven't. Right? So I'm quite confident that we will get it right and that the right players will be coming in at some point or another between now and the first game of the Champions League.
Yeah, look, I think it's worth pointing out that the Huns have got the Champions League qualification lottery to go through. Yeah. We've got the luxury of not having that.
Yeah.
So a lot of for all the bluster that's coming out of there at the moment, and their fans, they're miles ahead in the post-season cup as usual. Or the Bundesliga as it's becoming on. I'm not really too worried about any of the guys that they've signed. So, Steve, I'll put that one to you as well. What are you hoping to see for the rest of the transfer window?
Yeah, I'm kind of with Willie. I mean, we've spoken before about Joe Hart, and yes, he's great around the dressing room, and he's an experienced voice and all the rest of it. But the reality is, he saves a lot of the stuff you would expect him to save, but it just doesn't seem to be turning games, for us at the minute. He's not like your example, pulling a draw from, what looked like a defeat or a victory from a draw. So to my mind, I think that would be a good investment. And, with Willie. I was a bit disappointed to see that fella. Was it Dinamo Zagreb he was at?
Lavakovic.
Lavakovic, yeah.
Croatian fella. I mean, he looked really good, from a quick glance. But again, you're kind of hoping, right, okay, if the clubs, and obviously it's just rumour and innuendo, but if the club was linked with him, then the way we run the club now, it's not going to be a case of, oh, we need a goalkeeper, there's a list of one. The way we run the club now, you're confident that, the scouting department, are coming up with lists of 4 or 5, and if it's not, the first guy on the list, then, we've got 2, 3, and 4, to be, to be explored further. But to me, that would make a big difference. Really would, make a big difference. I mean, not domestically, let's be clear. It's maybe minor swing item, but in terms of Europe, finishing between a pot 4 team and a pot 3 team, we saw what a good goalkeeper did for Club Brugge last season. Frankly, it can make a huge difference. So that's probably, in a funny sort of way, my priority. I think O is going to come to the fore in terms of striker. He's a very different player from Kyoto. And it was great to see the club spend money on extending contracts for, some of those key players, which is a really good, sensible way of spending money. But I'm less kind of focusing there. I actually think the other big difference that would make would be a really strong defensive midfielder, because I think far too often, our defence was exposed, by the lack of support from midfield back into defence, in Europe, and if you're playing sides like Real Madrid that can break at that pace, or even Shakhtar, we saw it with Mudryk, the reality is, you're horribly exposed if you're not got, the midfield, supporting the defence. So I'd like to see that. And I think we do need to think about a replacement, for Jota. My gut feel says I think we've probably got another 2 or 3 to go out the door. I think Abada might well be away, so I don't know about Marco Tilio. I'd love to see him succeed, obviously, coming from Australia, but I think he's got a bit of development to do before he's sensibly in that space. Hopefully be surprised and he'll perform better. But yeah, I would have thought we'd be looking for a strong first team straight in winger coming in as well. So yeah, get the checkbook out and smash that cash that we've just been looking at.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that we're over in Japan just now. We've got a couple of proper games over there. The games in Portugal are essentially bounce games. We've got a couple of proper friendlies lined up there, and then we've got one in Dublin against Wolves in a couple of weeks' time. And I'm expecting once we see the games being played that we might see some more transfer action. I think Brendan's probably running his eye over the squad just now, with a view to seeing who he wants and who he doesn't want. And I agree with what both of you are saying there. I think a new goalkeeper should be pretty high on the list. And yeah, it was disappointing to see Lavakovic being, Fabrizio Romano reporting that he was signing with Fenerbahce, which generally means that it's done. Although it hasn't been confirmed yet, one. So where there's life, there's hope there, and that's definitely the type of signing that we should be in a position to make. Even though we'd have to break our transfer record for a goalkeeper, that's the sort of thing I think we should be prepared to do, and that could, propel us up the coefficient table quite significantly if it came off.
Yeah, I mean, you look at when we had Craig Gordon in goals and Fraser Foster came in, Lennon came in and signed Fraser Foster. People were kind of like, a few eyebrows were raised. What are you bringing Fraser Foster in when we have a decent keeper in Craig Gordon? And then after half a dozen games, you're like, okay, I see what that was all about. Yeah, big difference. Yeah. And the other thing I'll just sort of touch on quickly is with Brendan Rodgers, he's only been there 2 or 3 weeks now. You know what I mean? He still has to run the rule over all his transfer targets. There would have been a shift towards what Andrew's planning and what Brendan Rodgers is going to plan.
Mm-hmm.
So it's probably another reason why the big signings haven't come. If Andrew stayed for another season, the big signings would probably be in the door already and out on the training pitch with us. It's probably another reason why there's a slight delay in all this. So.
Yeah, and I think it's explainable, Willie, but let's be honest, I love the fact that, we were doing our January signings in December, it was completely unlike us as a club. And I loved the fact that, we gave the players time to, settle in and whatever. And I get it, it's a very valid point you make, which is Ange has to assess the squad, that's the right thing to do. And, it is disruptive, obviously, changing the manager. But, let's be honest, Brendan Rodgers not gone out and signed Marco Tilio, these two Korean boys, or, Holm or whatever, they're all been signings that are in the pipeline. I'm guessing he's allowed them to proceed because they're fairly limited spend items, maybe 10 million between the lot of them, but like you say, the bigger ticket players, he's probably said, actually, hold fire. I want to check what I've got and how I want to use the team, before I hit the trigger on, some of those. So, good point.
All right, guys, I'll probably wind it up there. Might just grab a final thought from you, Willie, before we go. What you got planned for the rest of the week and the rest of the closed season?
Well, my final thought is hurry up new season and start, because I'm getting bored with this now. I want my 3 a.m. wake up call to get up and watch a game of football. I'm missing this.
Yourself, Steve, any plans coming up?
Well, we've got the Women's World Cup, which I'm quite looking forward to that. And actually, European campaign actually starts over the next few weeks. We've actually got some draws that obviously don't involve us because we're, automatically qualified for the group stage, but they're relevant to the other Scottish sides. And, when we look at the Scottish coefficient, and where we are in the League of Nations table or whatever, we do need to see some of them pull their weight. I hate to say it, but Rangers actually have helped that coefficient quite significantly over the last few years, which makes it even funnier, the fact that we're automatically qualified for the group stage. I love it.
I've never heard them mention it once, though.
No, it's weird, isn't it? But it will be interesting to see how Hearts and Hibs and Aberdeen, how their draws go, and and whatnot. And those draws are starting to happen over the next couple of weeks. So should be one to watch as well.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the Women's World Cup as well. I've got myself some tickets for a couple of games at the sort of latter end of the competition, including the final. Got a couple of tickets for myself and my daughter for the World Cup final, so looking forward to that. Also, I heard on the Axel pod on Friday there, Jim Orr was mentioning that it's 8 weeks till the first derby match at Ibrox. So that's maybe I'm all sobering thought in terms of where we are with transfers. But the new season will be just round the corner and bring it on, is what I say. So with that, I'll wind the show up. And thanks very much, guys. That was great fun. And we'll see you all again in a few weeks when the Tuesday Crew is back in our regular live spot. All right, so have a good week and hail, hail.
Hail, hail.
Cheers.